Hey there, friends. How's it going? My name's Popeye, and Sam says is a hydrate. There's your hydrate. We've got water today, and we got Think Bigger Cream Ale. That's what we got on the menu for today. So yeah, we got some more Umineko for you. Question arc. Here. So it is a 4.8% alcohol by volume beer. It's a hop malt mix. Yeah. Water, malted barley, hops, yeast. Let's find out. It's okay. I got this in like a batch. This is like a small-time brewery. So I got a bunch of them. This is probably my least favorite so far. I like my beers hoppy. Much to Mrs. Popeye's chagrin, she hates that. She's like the total opposite. She wants kind of like a darker Guinness taste, and I want the fruity, hoppy taste. It's okay. I don't think it knows what it wants to be, so it's not really much of anything. That's how I would describe it. Yeah. Alright, before we get into Umineko, got some trigger warnings for you, because this game does have some pretty mature themes that I want everyone to be aware of. So this game has themes including, but not limited to, death, murder, torture, child abuse, dismemberment, gore, any of those things against a minor. So those are your trigger warnings. If that's not something for you, please, by all means, find another place to spend your time this evening. With that, last time, let me pull up the character sheet. So we had a couple things. Natsuki went and brought the family shotgun as protection and ordered everyone to stay in the parlor, which didn't go over so hot because Eva accused Natsuki of murdering grandfather and keeping everyone in that room to kind of make sure that they didn't find anything out. And her argument was this. Natsuki was the last person, allegedly, who is being open about it, at the very least, who've seen their grandfather alive. And when she was closing the door the last time, when grandfather wasn't there, Eva took a piece of paper, folded it very small, and stuck it inside the door frame, just as a way to check to see if anyone else had opened the door by the next time. And they didn't. And then she questions all of the servants, like, is there another way out of that room? You were there when it was built. Is there, a secret door? Is there, something with the window that can get out through the window? To which they all replied, no. So Eva creates this concept of there's a locked room, because we're able to prove that from the last time the grandfather was seen to when they opened the door, no one went in because her sheet of paper had not left. And grandfather was not in that room at that time. So what she accuses Aunt Natsuki of is lying when she said, oh, I saw grandfather earlier this morning before breakfast, that he was already dead and not in that room. To which Battler counters and says, well, maybe he was like hiding under the bed or something and then left after, and that's why you didn't see him, because you guys didn't search the room super well. After this, Auntie Eva relents, saying that maybe she jumped the gun a bit. And after this, people kind of slowly want to leave the parlor. Natsui's not super jazzed about that, but lets people go as long as they don't go alone. So, the servants are all in the kitchen. I believe they're supposed to be preparing dinner or cleaning up from dinner, something like that. There's your hydrate. And Battler slips out under the guise of needing to go to the bathroom, and overhears a conversation between Canon and Goda, Genji. I always call you Goda. Goda's dead. And Genji, where they essentially say that Beatrice is real, that she is someone who has worked with Grandfather for years and did in fact grandfather the gold. However, she's not... doesn't have a corporeal form. She's not a physical being. That she is a spirit who can sometimes give herself a form, but only to those who, have the sixth sense. Of which apparently Battler does not have, because if we're to believe Maria, who comes in the room later, Maria says that he doesn't have the sense, and everyone else in the room is staring beyond Battler at something or someone that we cannot see. The implication there being Beatrice was in the room with us, and Maria says that Beatrice hates when people say that she is not real, and says that if Battler didn't have the charm that Maria gave him, that he would be dead, which Battler counters, I actually lost that. I never had the charm. After you gave it to me, I lost it at some point after that beach outing we had, so that can't be right, because if you're saying she would kill me without it, and I haven't had it, then she should have killed me. And I think that about sums it up. So with that, let's dive back into it. The uncomfortable atmosphere continued even after those two left. Who are those two? Oh, and I guess Maria also says Beatrice controls the power of the demons, which have powers like their card captor Sakura cards, and one of them lets you teleport. So that Maria argues if Beatrice could be the killer, because Beatrice can go in and out of that room without it. Now, I guess we'll find out soon who the two are. It was thick with the idea. Oh, I think if I remember correctly, it's Eva and her husband said they were going to go to bed. They tried to invite George as well, and George declined. It had begun to feel like discussion of the incidents was itself taboo. So no one was mentioning it, at least out loud. However, those thoughts were what filled our minds. All we couldn't say aloud made our heads feel like they were going to explode. So at least on the outside, the parlor had once again regained its calm mood, though everything was left unsettled.
少しだけ雨足が弱まった気がするね。
まだいっぱい降ってるよ。
仮に止んだって、この島には船がねえんだしな。船が明日すぐに来てくれりゃいいんだがよ。洋館バカンさんもうお腹いっぱいだぜ。
母さん、明日船はいつ来るのかな。
本来なら帰りの船は今日の3時に来てくれることになっていました。先方も台風が過ぎてから出直すと電話をしてくれたでしょうが、あいにく電話は普通ですから。でも向こうも子供の使いではありません。客人の方々の送迎目的だと教えてありますから、おそらく明日の朝一番で、多分9時頃に来てくれるでしょう。
It was completely black outside. When I looked at the clock, I realized it was just past 7. I was starting to get hungry. In the kitchen, Kumasawa was cooking enthusiastically. He'd laid out a variety of dishes, and while they didn't match the level of Goda's artful cooking, they were still quite gorgeous. It was an act of kindness from Kumasawa, trying to use food to enliven everyone's low spirits. Kumasawa wasn't nearly as talented as a professional cook like Goda, but she was far from unskilled. On the contrary, since she'd been brought up in a fishing village, the simple food she created was sometimes very highly valued. Kennen arranged the food. Kumasawa had finished creating on plates under her direction. Kennen also helped in the kitchen sometimes, but since he rarely placed in that role, he was slightly awkward even though he tried his best. Self-conscious about the fact that he couldn't skillfully arrange the food, Kennen's expression darkened slightly. Kumasawa smiled to say everything was fine.
綺麗に盛り付けられてますよ。カノン君もお上手ですよ。
シャノン姉さんだったらもっと綺麗に。
Kennen stopped arranging the food for a bit and hung his head. Shannon was the one who always assisted Kumasawa in her cooking. Tonight, Kennen was doing it instead. As he remembered Shannon's face and her brutal end, he grimaced. Genji spoke kindly to Kennen as he advanced a pawn. Nanjo had escaped from the parlor once the mood had become sour, and Genji had become his opponent in a game of chess upon Nanjo's request.
はい、今は忘れます。
それがいいだろう。
Genji purposely faced away from Kennen as he spoke. He did so because he understood that it might make things tougher on Kennen if he noticed that someone was looking at his eyes. Nanjo also understood that and held back any thoughtless words.
金蔵さんもどこへ行かれたんでしょうな。ご無事だといいのですが。わかりません。ただ、すべては親方様が望まれ、仕組まれたことのように思っています。それを邪推することは、親方様にお仕えする家具には過ぎたことです。源氏さんは怖くないのですか？私には今夜まだ何か良くないことが起こるような気がして。怖いことなど何も。私はただ後ろ宮家にお仕えするだけです。
Nanjo sighed through his nose and made a carefully considered move. Nanjo was very slightly dubious. Could Genji possibly think that he would be left out of this? He couldn't begin to imagine what was happening inside this mansion, but he definitely couldn't deny the possibility that it was something of Kinzo's design. Whoop. Double-clicked. If he likened this island to chess, Kinzo had opened the game, and as a result, 6 pieces had fallen. Could it be that Genji was calm because he believed that he alone was outside the chessboard and safe? Nanjo thought about it. Wasn't everyone just a piece on this chessboard lined up equally without any exceptions? It wasn't even Genji who had gained more of Kinzo's trust than anyone. No, it wasn't Nanjo himself. Although proud of his position as Kinzo's only close friend, just another one of these pieces laid out on the chessboard.
Genji-san, 私は今夜が本当に怖いのです。無事に明日の朝を迎えられることを心より願っています。
The guest room that even Hideyoshi had moved into was used to house guests before the guest house had been constructed. So until a few years ago, they had stayed in this room every family conference and were very familiar with it. This room, just like a room at a hotel, had a bedroom and a bathroom. Even though they were still shut in, it was far more comfortable than the parlor.
やっぱり家族だけだとリラックスできるな。他のみんなも客室にこもって鍵をかけてりゃええんや。
夏日姉さんが客間を出るなって威張り散らしてるんだもん。誰も口答えなんてできないでしょ。あの人ずーっと冷や飯を食ってきたから 兄さんが死んでやっと天下が来たって張り切ってんのよ。まったくずうずうしいったら。
Oh yes, and congratulations, you passed 10,000 clicks.
まあそう言うな。夏日さんもあれで結構頑張っとるんやで。お前もそう突っかからんでもええやないか。さっきのレシートの件もあそこまでは言い過ぎやで。
だってあそこで言わなかったらもう言うタイミングがないんだもん。
Yeah, I'm using mouse. I know some people use spacebar. I like my mouse because it's further from my mic, so I find it makes less sound. And how are you doing today, Destroyer? Oh, and I did not read that text at all.
でも、こうして二人きりになるのはずいぶん久しぶりよね。
Eva self-concutely sat down beside Hideyoshi, who was lying on the bed watching TV.
そうやな。思えばわしもお前も老けたもんや。ジョージが生まれてから何もかもがあっという間や。
本当にあっという間よ。子供を作るの焦りすぎたかしら。
Eva's eyes looked like they were staring off into the distance. Yes, she had thought it a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Glad to hear you're doing fine. Her older brother, Kraus, had been unable to have a child for quite some time. 6 years passed after his marriage to Natsuki without any signs of pregnancy, which didn't please Kinzo at all. As for Eva herself, she would be removed from the Ushiromiya register anyway once she got married. So whether a successor to the head was born or not, it was all the same to her. So she had thought. Then one day, she had a heavenly revelation. Or maybe it was the whisperings of the devil that she had heard in her greed. Perhaps she could remain in the Ushiromiya register if she gave birth to a successor first. If things went well, perhaps she could even inherit the Ushiromiya family herself. When she proposed this to Hideyoshi, he approved of it instantly. This had not been because Hideyoshi also had greedy thoughts. For Hideyoshi, who had no close relatives, it was a chance for him to feel once more that long-forgotten thing called family. So he agreed without hesitation not to fuss over which family name they were to keep upon getting married, and assented to having his name entered into the Ushiromiya family register. It wasn't easy to persuade Kinzo, but as his daughter, Eva knew Kinzo's personality well, so she chose the time when Kinzo was most dissatisfied with Natsuki, and expertly managed to make him accept Hideyoshi as a son-in-law. Looking at Hideyoshi, who had achieved success after starting from nothing, Kinzo might have seen a little bit of himself. He quickly grew to like Hideyoshi and permitted him to transfer into the Ushiromiya register. George would eventually become the successor to the Ushiromiya family. They had raised him strictly with that purpose in mind. George had been worth their while and had grown into a fabulous young man who wouldn't disappoint no matter where he went. That was why she couldn't stand that he was in love with a servant like Shannon. So when she had learned that Shannon had died and the engagement had been invalidated, well, part of her had been shocked at the gruesome crime. Another part of her had been relieved that her precious George wouldn't be stolen by some servant girl.
私、クラウス兄さんのことが昔から嫌いだったわ。偉そうで威張ってて。自分がやがては当主になったから、それに一矢報いてやりたかった。
I mean, there's definitely characters here you're designed not to like. I think most of the adults, except for maybe our stepmom. Hideyoshi's alright, I guess. Natsuhi has her moments, but like the four immediate heirs, I think there's easy reason to hate all of them.
でも、それは子供の頃の感情なのよ。でもその感情は結局自分の人生のほとんどを支配した。 それだけならまだいい。その感情はあなたやジョージまで巻き込んで振り回してしまった。
エヴァ、備え自分を責めるな。
Hideyoshi sat up and put his arm around Eva. She could feel a warm understanding from him.
わしはな、自分の人生はもうとっくに折り返しに入っとる。でもな、今日までの生活を後悔したことは一度もないで。一度もや。エヴァと一緒で他の男どもじゃ味わえん楽しい人生になったと思っとる。戦争で身寄りを失ったわしにもう一度家族のぬくもりを教えてくれた。だから後ろ宮の家には感謝しとるし、わしの唯一の家だと思っとる。わしとお前が歩んできた人生にな、今日までほんまに楽しい人生。
Don't raise that death flag, mister.
ありがとう、あなた。
Eva hung her head, burying her face in Hideyoshi's chest. Probably no one in the parlor could even imagine that this side of Eva
感謝
existed.
するのはわしや。今日までお前と一緒にいて後悔した日なんてあらへん。
Yeah, for sure.
私もよ。あなたと一緒になれてよかった。
ジョージももう立派な大人や。わしが見張ってなくてもしっかり仕事ができる一人前や。で、正月あたりをのんびりモルジブあたりで過ごさんか。わしら二人水いらずや。
いやよ、毎年年賀状の返礼で寝る暇もないとか言ってるじゃない。
次の正月だけはなしや。年賀状は見ん。黙って下のお年玉くじだけチェックするんや。今年はカラーテレビくらい当てたいで。
やだ、モルジブでお年玉くじのチェックなんてしたくない。
じゃあそいつもなしや。水いらずのんびりで、ジョージが生まれる直前の新婚時代の続きをちょいとしてみんか。
それならいいわね。
モルジブはええとこらしいで。なんもない島に美しいサンゴ礁と水上コテージが並んでてな。
新婚時代の続きっていつからなの？
仕事納めしたらすぐや。旅行店に聞いてみんとわからんが、多分大晦日前には。
いや、今すぐがいい。
Evishly, or maybe I never remember how to pronounce this word. Coquettishly, Eva pled for his lips. The only sounds that filled the room were the distant voice of the announcer on the TV, Hideyoshi had left on, and the obnoxious pounding of the rain against the window. There was a knock on the door and Genji-san entered.
奥様、お夕食の準備が整う。お食事はまたこちらでよろしいですか？
ええ。ここへ運ばせなさい。南條先生はまだ厨房にいるのですか？
はい。次の一手を熟考したいとおっしゃっております。ご安心を。他の使用人たちとご一緒です。
源氏さんはじい様の相手ができるくらいチェスが強いもんな。南條先生よりも強いらしいぜ。
そうなんだ。昔相手をしてもらったことがあるけど。
マリア、もうすぐ飯だそうだぜ。しかしよく一日中テレビを見ていて飽きねえな。
うん、いつもテレビいっぱい見てるから平気。うん。
ええ、マリアちゃんはテレビっ子なんだね。
This is the pre-iPad kid. She's a TV kid.
食事だから机の上を片付けないとダメだぜ。
It was still cluttered with the aftermath of the drawing contest we'd all been having. using several pages torn out of Maria's notebook. Jessica began cleaning that up quickly. Still, everyone here sure can draw. Really shocking.
源氏、エヴァさんたちにもせめて食事くらい一緒にしないかとお声をかけなさい。どうせ断るでしょうが。
かしこまりました。
お父様の次はエヴァさんですか。つくづく後宮家の食卓には全員が揃いませんね。
Mitsui felt her headache start throbbing again and lightly held her temple. I don't think this is lightly. This is some Phantom of the Opera stuff. If it's currently 7 p.m., you can't see because my chair's in the way, but it says the time here is 1900 hours. It's 7 p.m., so he's been missing for approximately 11 hours, give or take. The distance from the kitchen to the parlor wasn't that large, so Genji had gone there and back by himself. But the guest room was a little farther away. Tetsuya had warned him not to be alone without good reason. And just now, Nanjo had also admonished him, saying it would be better if he felt a little more concern for his safety. Genji took Kennen with him, and the two of them went to visit Iba and Hideyoshi in their guest room. Is it just me or their keyholes upside down? I haven't seen a whole lot of like old-timey doors like this, but I always remember it being the other way, where the large part's at the top. Genji knocked on the door.
Eva-sama, Hideyoshi-sama, お夕食の準備が整いました。
Okay. I think I only have one relative that has like an older house that was probably built in like the early 1900s. They have keys on like bathroom doors and stuff. Kennen pointed under the door. A Western-style envelope had been inserted under it. We just see Kinzo, like Spider-Man, like upside down, drop into one of the windows. Normally when something was inserted this way, it would be interpreted as a message from someone outside to someone in the room. So since this might be a private note meant for Iba and Hideyoshi, it was not something that Ken and Genji were supposed to take interest in. But this Western-style envelope was Kinzo's envelope, the same as the one Maria had taken out last night and surprised everyone with. Although it had been Kinzo's envelope, the author of the letter Maria had read aloud last night had not been Kinzo. Genji continued knocking a little harder and called out in a louder voice.
Eva-sama, Genji de gozaimasu. Irasshaimasu ka? O henji o onegai itashimasu. Eva-sama.
There was no response from inside. Sometimes when the servants went to call some guests for a meal, the guests would be sleeping so deeply that they wouldn't wake up. Times like that, the servant would stick a letter in the door to show that they had called by and leave the guest be. However, despite that, Genji beat even harder on the door and called out Iba's name. There was no answer. Kennen stuck his ear up to the door and, holding his breath, listened for any sound coming from inside. I'm pretty sure we're still around episode 1, maybe episode 2 if we're lucky. And it's a 12 episode, 1 season anime. Genji took out a handkerchief and, careful not to touch it with his bare hands, gently pulled out the envelope which had been stuck into the door. It had been sealed with deep red sealing wax. You remember how Uncle Hunter worked? That's how this one works. This is question arc number 1. There's 4 question arcs and 4 answer arcs.
Eva-sama, Eva-sama, どうかお返事を。もうお部屋にはいらっしゃいませんか?
Even so, there was still no answer. I won't answer that. in case people who haven't seen want to know, but I think we're kind of getting near the end. Kinzo vanished in the morning. I believe it's before the murders were found, but after everyone was missing. Because I think people started looking at like 6 in the morning, the servants did, because they had to get up early for breakfast. Natsuhi went to speak to grandfather, I believe around 8 o'clock, and he was still there, saying he wouldn't come to breakfast. And then they went again to check in on him, I think around 9, after everyone was found. All the bodies were found, and he was missing at that point. If only we had a gold-plated yacht. There was a chance the two were aimlessly walking around the mansion. This was the home Eva had grown up in. There was plenty of reason to think she had gone out on a casual stroll. Genji groped around in his pocket and pulled out a bundle of keys, including the one that would open the guest room. Cannon also understood what this meant. They would sometimes unlock a guest door so they could go in and do things like make beds, but only after they had made sure the guest was out. To unlock the door for a separate reason, and especially to do so when there was a chance the guests were still in there, and without their permission, was an action unbecoming of a servant. However, Genji had decided. If the problem had been that his knock hadn't received a reply, he wouldn't have gone this far. The envelope under the door was doubtlessly Kinzo's, or rather one of the Western-style envelopes of the Ushiromiya family head. And after last night, the sender of this envelope could be someone other than Kinzo. If this letter had been sent by someone other than Kinzo... After giving that final notice, Genji stuck one of the keys from the bundle into the keyhole. There was the sound of the door unlocking, and then he slowly turned the knob and slowly started opening the door. Light seeped through the crack of the door. Were they in the room, or had they forgotten to turn out the lights? Clank. It was the sound of the door chain being pulled tight. The chain had been secured. The chain couldn't be secured from the outside. That meant they were in the room now. The sound of the voices on the TV seeped out of the room. The lights, the chain, and the TV. All these things made it clear that they were in the room. There was no sign of them. Genji called to Eva once again through the crack of the door, but there was no answer. As part of their job, servants were able to unlock almost any lock in the mansion. But they had no way to open a door with a chain. The only way to get by the chain was to cut it. That was certainly not permitted as part of a servant's usual work. The creepy chill was already rushing up their backs. Cannon held his breath again and tried to sense someone through the door. Even so, he was not able to sense anyone. How about we don't split the party? That seems like a better course of action right now. As Cannon rushed away hurriedly to get a cutting tool, he was called back by Genji. Oh, it was fine when the 6 other people died. Maybe he could. It looked like Cannon was wondering why he had to do something so troublesome in the middle of this urgent situation. But Genji had said it out of weariness. He didn't care what happened to himself, but in the worst case scenario, he didn't want anything to happen to Cannon. In the kitchen was Kumasawa, who was piling food on the serving cart, and Nanjo, who seemed to have thought of a move that would turn the tables on Genji and had been awaiting his return, wanting to show him. But he immediately realized that something was wrong with Genji's demeanor.
この勝負は一度中断させてください。カノンはチェーンを頼む。熊沢、食事の配膳は一時中断し、私は奥様のところへ行く。南條先生、ご一緒に。何かあったんですかな。
Genji took Nanjo, who still didn't know what was going on, and quickly left the kitchen.
熊沢さん、申し訳ありませんが、僕と一緒に来てください。
何があったんですか、カノンさん。
Unable to take in the situation, Kumasawa said almost exactly the same thing as Nanjo, and chased after Cannon, who had flown out into the hallway. Accompanied by Kumasawa, Cannon went to the storehouse, and from amongst the tools packed in toolboxes and hanging on the wall, he looked for a tool that could be used to cut the chain.
何を探してるんですか。私も手伝いますよ。
ドアチェーンを切断するんです。大きめの番線カッターはどこだっけ。
ドアチェーンをどうしてそんなことをするんですか。
エヴァ様たちのお部屋にチェーンが中にいらっしゃるはずなのに、お声をかけても返事がないんです。
It took Kumasawa some time to figure out how cutting the chain and even Hideyoshi not answering were connected, but she did realize that this was an urgent situation.
これなら多分。
Cannon took down a very large bolt cutter that had been hanging on the wall. It's called a cutter, but maybe it would have been easier to understand if it was described as having the shape of a large pair of pliers. It recalled being warned that it was a dangerous tool that could easily cut through one of your fingers. Cannon took that and rushed up the stairs. Remember, kids, run with your bolt cutters. That's the safety training we want here. He knew it instinctively. You should fight for every minute, every second to open it quickly. Or maybe already.
待ってください、カノンさん。
早く。
Kumasawa eventually caught up with him, gasping for breath with both hands on her knees. When Cannon changed his grip on the bolt cutter and looked up at the door, he let out an ah, struck speechless.
Nan desu ka, kore wa?
Kumasawa screamed weakly, her face pallid. No surprise, because right there on the door, just like the magic circle that had been drawn on the shutter of the Rose Garden storehouse, there was another eerie shape drawn with paint that looked like blood. However, it was dubious whether this one could be called a magic circle. So unlike what most people think of as a magic circle, it wasn't a circle with shapes drawn inside of it, but a slightly more geometrical shape. Of the strange non-alphabetical characters written in the gaps of the figure were without doubt the same as the magic circle on the shutter. But the thing that Cannon struck speechless was not how eerie the magic circle was. Only moments ago this hadn't been here. He returned to the kitchen for a short while, and then gone to the storehouse to grab a tool and headed right back. Put those together and it couldn't have been more than 5 minutes. How could someone add something this creepy during that period of time? Yet 5 minutes. And as though it had just been drawn, almost like the door itself was bleeding, several unsettling vertical red lines slowly dripped down, getting longer and longer. Once we get all the information, we'll go back over all the people and see who it could have been. But let's gather information first. Kumasawa's knees gave way and she sank down on the spot. Kumasawa hadn't done this first, and Cannon surely would have wanted to.
Beatrice...
ベアトリーチェ様の仕業ですよ。恐ろしや恐ろしや。
Cannon gulped, then readied the bolt cutter and approached the door. He didn't want to get close to this disturbing magic circle, and he really didn't want to touch the steadily dripping substance that looked like blood. But if he didn't get close, he couldn't cut the chain. Fighting this cold feeling, he gulped again, and after gathering his courage, went even closer, putting the bolt cutter up against the chain. He then pressed with all of his strength and cut through the chain far more easily than he had imagined. The chain fell into 2 separate parts, which continued to clang as they swayed back and forth.
カノンさん、足元に封筒が。しかもこれは親方様のもの。
It looked like Kumasawa had also noticed the Western-style envelope at the bottom of the door, and that the sealing wax had been sealed with the head's ring. Kenan was lost for just a second over whether he should open the letter first or check inside the room, but he decided on prioritizing his original purpose. Kenan pulled a handkerchief out of his pocket. This was so he wouldn't leave fingerprints on the door. If his worst fears had been realized, the police would want to investigate this room too. He slowly pushed the door open. Actually, before we get into this... Okay. I was curious to see if they would be marked as gray. They are still marked as alive at this moment in time. Not missing, not dead, they're marked as alive. He was able to hear the sound of the television that had been seeping out slightly more clearly now. Ava was face up on the bed with her shoes still on. Kumasawa, who had fearfully entered after Cannon, and who was hiding behind his back, screamed a short "hee" again when she saw Eva like that. It's still a good thought. Eva's shoes had been the first part of her that Cannon had seen, so the incongruity of wearing shoes in bed was the first thing that entered his mind. Yeah, I figured he meant paint. But after he shifted his line of sight towards Eva's head, Cannon couldn't help but let out a short scream like Kumasawa. Right in the middle of Eva's forehead, something was set there? Growing there? No. Right in the center of her forehead, an old-fashioned knife, in quotes, or some weapon like it was stuck right in. From the base where it stuck in. I'm going to remind everyone of the trigger warnings of this game. We're going to get into murder right now. They do not hold back on the description here. Hello, Beardy. Welcome for murder. I think Beardy did it. He wasn't around this whole time. Blood dripped down, staining the sheets. On the other side, bright red. Kumasawa's knees gave way one more time, and she sank down on the floor. Her mouth kept flapping open and closed, but she couldn't even scream. Eva, with some kind of weapon sticking out of her forehead, was dead. She is now dead. Hideyoshi is alive for now. Both eyes were open wide, and the image of the person who killed her must have been burned into them. But the mouth, with which to speak that truth, had already been eternally sealed. Even though that forehead was the last piece they wanted to look at, they couldn't tear their eyes from it. Right there, the weapon was stuck in Eva's forehead, standing almost perfectly upright. On the handle was a design so complicated you could never expect to see it on an ordinary weapon. That thing can be summed up with the word occult. It was a vulgar object, with a design that might have been of some demon.
Hideyoshi-sama!
Eva was on top of her bed, but the other bed was empty. Where was Hideyoshi? After taking a backwards glance at Kumasawa, still on her knees and stupefied, he checked the bathroom just in case. At the moment he opened the door, he was greeted by steam and the sound of the shower. The bathroom was of the same familiar style as most hotel bathrooms, containing both a bath and a toilet. In taking a shower, a waterproof curtain was used to keep water from flying out. Oh jeez, that is pretty graphic. That waterproof curtain was half open, and lying tumbled down in the bathtub was Hideyoshi, completely naked, both eyes still open. yeah, running up the water bill, leaving the lights on. And those eyes were pointing right at Cannon. Just like Eva, a weapon with a demonic design was stuck into his forehead. Since the head had been under hot water of the shower this whole time, his face wasn't half covered and filthy with blood like Eva's had been. He's still alive, guys! He's not dead yet! But the sight of him dead while taking a shower was tragic enough. Okay, now he's dead. We have to hear the word, like, they're dead, they died, and then they turn red. There's also a little water drop sound effect. I don't know if that was related to the exact moment that they died. Also, if you haven't noticed this before, the blood marks show where their injuries happened. So you can see they got stabbed in the forehead, whereas other people had, like, half or their whole face, like, cut up. Just then, Natsuki's voice rang through the hall. He's probably coming with Genji. This is true, and like right at the front. Like I know there's weaker points. I think near the back you have weaker points. Because I know if you're doing like surgery, like brain surgery, I think unless they need to like access the front, then I guess maybe they go through the front. But I think they prefer going through the back. We are one away from the good suspicious number. Okay, Samus, I'll hear you out. Who is drawing the bloody circle then after all of this? Because these two clearly couldn't have done it.
この手紙は中には何と
いえ、まだ読んでおりません。うかつに触らん方がいいですな。犯人の指紋が残ってるかもしれん。警察に渡した方がいい。
わざわざ手紙を残すくらいです。どうせ指紋など残っていません。
Stating this with finality, Natsuki picked up the envelope. Before checking the contents, she entered the room herself, where she found Eva dead. Yes, this is also true. You can't lock it from inside. Ken gripped his handkerchief and twisted the valve, turning off the shower. In the bathtub, a small bottle of body soap had fallen with its cap off. It really looked like he'd been attacked right in the middle of taking a shower. A spray of blood still clung tightly to the white bathtub, and the combination of red and white made a horrible contrast.
It's a new month, so this gets me points. Tier 1.
わかった。市販は出た。
Show love to I can't let Deadbeard show me up.
Gosh dang it.
死後硬直も始まっとらん。おそらく殺されてから1時間経ったかどうかというところだろう。
Okay. Under an hour since they have been killed.
しかし、このような柄の短い凶器で頭蓋骨を。
And like you were talking about, how could something like that do this to a skull?
考えられん。
Nunja checked their pulse and their pupils, making certain of their deaths once more. As Cannon watched this business-like treatment, he thought, couldn't you tell at a glance that they're dead without doing all that? Ninja thought about removing the weapon, but after deciding that where possible it would be better to hand the scene over to the police without disturbing it, he left it alone. However, a close examination of the base revealed it had no blade. Rather, it wasn't shaped like a flat blade, it was conical. He noticed that, rather than a knife, it was more like a short-handled spear. Something with a shape better suited for thrusting than slicing. Also, we crossed 11,000 clicks. Oh yeah, and we can check the current song. If you like this one, it's called Golden Slaughterer. Rather than a short spear, some people might call it a thick ice pick. Thank you for making suspicious thrusting our suspicious 69. At any rate, the original hideous purpose for which this weapon with its unsettling design was made, exactly how that purpose was carried out, were both displayed here in such a glaring fashion that there were absolutely no need for further words to describe it. Natsui, hoping to escape the repulsive steam filling the bathroom as soon as she could, covered her mouth with a handkerchief and dashed from the room. Just viewing the gruesome bodies for an instant had been enough to burn the image into her eyes. Thank you for the quote. If she looked any longer, that vision would surely remain in her vision for all eternity. The rising urge to vomit was exactly the same feeling she felt that morning at the gardening storehouse. For a while, Natsui couldn't help but stand with her back facing the guest room, fighting that sickness in her stomach. I don't even remember the context of that quote at all. I can quickly at least find out what game it's from. So if I open up... I mean, I removed them for the purpose of that, but I do have a raw quote command that was on thought files. My raw quotes. And it is... It's from Trails to Azure. So something I did in Trails to Azure let me do that. And yes, I don't know if Eve is the killer. Unless she killed those other people, then this one was a suicide. But the recklessly approaching footsteps were obviously George's even before he came flying into the room. George and the other children had been waiting in the parlor. When they'd seen Genji call Natsuki out, and noticed her turn pale and fly out of the room, they had felt that he might have been the bearer of bad news. When they saw a large group of people gathered around the guest room, they were sure of it. Cannon didn't have anything to say. George's scream after he ran into the room told them everything they needed to know. George is having a pretty rough day. He's lost his parents and his fiancée. And so he touched George's shoulder with her hand, but he violently shook her off. George collapsed on the floor beside Eva and buried his face in the bed in front of his mother's face, wailing. Then he pounded on the bed with his fist over and over again. The battler had his back against the wall of the hallway, and was without restraint covering his eyes with his right hand and weeping. Yes, so far everything has been a head injury.
同じ日に親父とおふくろまで殺されるなんてよ。そんなのあんまりにも。
What this does raise into question is, who inherits now? So if we went down the line, it was those four, and then did it go... I think Jessica's now in line to inherit everything. It skipped spouses, and then I think it went kids down the line. So it's either Jessica or George is the oldest kid. Her is the oldest child of the oldest child. The oldest... Yeah, the oldest child of the oldest child, or George is the oldest grandchild. Of course, he felt sorry for everyone who had died, but Battler felt far more sorry for those who had been left alone by the deaths of others. Everyone here had now lost someone close to them. George wasn't the only one who felt sorry for. However, George's pain was far greater than everyone else's. Maria tried to comfort Battler in a mechanical-sounding voice. Battler violently wiped his tears. Yeah, I think it's Kinzo. He just traded all of his family for, you know, like the Fountain of Youth or something from Beatrice, so he just has to kill all his family to be young again.
What the
Time is now unknown.
この部屋は警察が来るまでこのままにして施錠します。いいですね。
And so he proclaimed as though she didn't care whether they agreed or not. If anyone had a right to object, it would have been George, but he looked as though he had shed enough tears. Still facing away from them, George nodded slightly and rose to his feet, and everyone else agreed in response. Mitsui still hadn't opened the head's Western-style envelope she picked up. But since they would be leaving the room now, she decided that she would unseal it in the parlor, where everyone could watch. As soon as they walked out into the hallway to head back to the parlor, some of them immediately felt something out of place, or maybe sensed something strange.
答えよ。
こりゃ何の匂いだよ。
They all sniffed the air. They did notice a horribly foul burnt smell, unlike anything any of them had ever smelled before, drifting through the hallway.
私、ちょっと厨房を見てきます。火はちゃんと消したはずなんですよ。
After noticing a burnt smell, it was natural that Kumasawa, who had just been cooking in the kitchen, suspected it was her own clumsiness that had caused it. Kumasawa hastily dashed away.
熊沢と行きなさい。一人にさせないように。
はい。
After nodding at Genji's order, Ken went chasing after her. The others, although they did not run, also followed in order to search for the source of the smell.
臭い。
これは確かに鼻が曲がりそうな匂いですね。しかし換気のために窓を開けてもいいものか。
Natsui was reluctant to open the windows in a situation where self-defense was so important.
換気扇を回させましょう。窓を開ける必要はないと思います。
上司の兄貴、話しかけても大丈夫かよ。
犯人を探す相談なら構わないよ。
George is pissed. Seeing George had already climbed out of the abyss of his sorrow. All that filled his chest now was the quiet flame of hatred towards the killer who had stolen the lives of his beloved
部屋
parents.
にはチェーンがかかってた。さっき構造を見たが、とても外から細工できる代物じゃねえ。つまり完璧な密室だったってことだ。
そうなるね。バラ庭園の倉庫の時はシャッターの鍵を使用人室からこっそりと持ち出したのだろうとか、あるいは複製の鍵を持っていた可能性とか、いくつか方法が想像できた。でもチェーンは違う。チェーンは一般に浸透した施錠方法の中で最もシンプルに密室を構築できる。
チェーンだけは物理的に破壊しない限り外からはどうにもならないぜ。
Yeah, which probably means they were taken by surprise.
じゃあつまり犯人は扉からは出入りしなかったってことなのか。
こりゃ面白い。つい数時間ほど前にも扉以外でどうやって部屋から出入りしたのかって。
Back then, everyone had been making a fuss over how grandfather disappeared from his room. Because of the receipt that Auntie had stuck in the door on a whim, it was revealed that the door had remained sealed. And since Aunt Natsui had been the only person to enter or exit during the time, she had come under suspicion. Aunt Eva had proposed a theory about how Aunt Natsui might have thrown grandfather out the window, and left by the door herself. But this door is much simpler. It was sealed from the inside by the door chain. The window had also been closed from the inside, and the bodies had been in the room. This time, it really was, without exaggeration, a true locked room. That's right. To include grandfather's disappearance, 3 incidents have occurred, and all 3 times, the door has been the point of interest. His grandfather's room was the last place he was seen in, and I believe it was about an hour between he was seen and when they checked again. And we can confirm that the door was not opened during that hour. First was the shutter. There was a key in the servant room, and if we assume someone knew about that, this can't really be called a locked room. Maybe, but I imagine someone would hear it. Next was the door sealed by the receipt. Ever since Aunt Natsuki had entered the room. Secret passages was what was brought up with this room. That Aunt Eva, who would accuse Aunt Natsuki of it, started by asking Is it possible grandfather left out the window? No. Is it possible that there is a secret passage? No. So the solution to this one was, or the proposed solution, since we don't have a confirmed solution, was that they checked on grandfather, which unsealed the room. He was hiding somewhere because they didn't really search, say under the bed, in a closet, something like that. And then after they left, he left after that. But the difference here is the bodies never left the room, the windows and doors are locked from the inside. So that implies either the witch did it, it was a double suicide, murder-suicide kind of deal, or there's some kind of secret passage we don't know about. In this one, I don't think they have checked under the bed. Since she could have let grandfather out through the window or thrown him out, she would have been able to lock the window before leaving. But like my crazy theory, he could have hidden until the receipt was gone and left the room later. Basically, the door can be defeated with a handful of desperate tricks. In that sense, you can't really call this one a locked room either. And now we have the door sealed with the door chain. Finally, we have to give up. The window of the door, everything had been locked from the inside. It was a perfectly locked room. The first hadn't been a locked room because anyone could be suspected. The second hadn't been a locked room because Anatsuhi could be suspected. This time, no one can be suspected. The room was a perfect locked room sealed by a door chain that denied access equally to everyone. I don't think they looked for spider kids, though.
部屋の外から何らかの方法で。
確かにチェーンである以上、人が通れるほどは開けなくても多少の隙間を開けることができる。ノックして顔を覗かせたところを襲うとか。いや、甘いか。
甘いよな。エヴァおばさんの遺体が扉のすぐそばだったならそれも。だがエヴァおばさんは部屋の奥のベッドの上、しかも秀吉おじさんはバスルームだった。チェーンの隙間からでは姿を見ることもできねえし、手を伸ばすこともできねえ。ちくしょう、全然ダメだぜ。さっぱりだ。
Something was tugging softly at my sleeve. It was Maria. We still haven't asked Maria what the magic circle meant.
満足って。
We got Demon Maria again.
バトラは親族の誰かを疑うのが嫌だから、犯人はベアトリーチェであってほしいと願ったよ。だからベアトリーチェは叶えた。バトラが言った通り、絶対に人間には無理なことをして、バトラに魔女の存在を信じさせて。
Yeah, if you were a Sith Lord, you could use the Force to lock. Because you don't need a line of sight to use the Force, right? So you could kill the people, close the door, and then use the Force on the chain through that little crack to lock it, right?
なのにわがまま。
Okay, everyone, hold out your fingies. Who's got blood on their fingies from drawing the magic circle? I tap Maria, who's laughing unpleasantly on the head with my fist.
ああ、叶えてくれてありがとうよ。今のはその礼と、不謹慎な時に笑ったことへの教育的指導だ。それより教えやがれ。エヴァおばさんたちの部屋の扉にも、また怪しげな落書きがされていた。あれもまた魔法陣なのか。
あれは特に覚えやすい特徴的な形なんだから、あのくらい知っててほしいね。
知らねえから花を持たせてやってんだ。ごちゃごちゃ言わねえで解説しろ。
バトラは暴力的だね。あんまり意地悪すると教えないよ。言うよこのげんこつ男。あれは月の1の魔法陣だよ。
何の意味がある？その魔法陣のご利益は？書かれてるヘブライ語の意味は？
記されているのは旧約聖書詩編第107編
For
の
reference,
16節
since they're referencing like Bible verses, the last one they did was also a psalm. I looked up after and it was correct. So the verses that they're saying here are real verses. They're just interpreting them how they want to be interpreted.
主は聖堂の扉を破り鉄の栓抜きを打ち破ってくださいました。
Maria's into the occult, so she knows Hebrew and what all of these magic circles and all the angels and demons. That's what they've given us, and that's why she turns into this like occult mode child.
魔法陣の効用は2つ。1つはいかなる方法によって閉ざされた扉でも開くことができる。
そりゃ便利な魔法だぜ。つまり魔法の力に頼らなきゃ開けぬ密室の扉っていうもう一つの効用は、
開かぬ扉を八方塞がりの事態に見立て扉を開く。難解な事態の時に用いることでそれまで思いつきもしなかった解決策を与えてくれるんだよ。平たく言うと観察力や洞察力、ひらめきや直感を授けてくれるんだね。ベアトリーチェはバトラごとき人間風情にこの扉の開き方がわかるものかって挑発してるんだよ。
Yes, fellow humans, let's prove her wrong.
よーし、もう黙れご苦労。上等だぜ。その魔女の挑戦。
マリアちゃん、この世に魔女も悪魔も存在しない。父さんと母さんは誰かが殺した。それが僕のよく知る人間なのか知らない人間なのかはわからない。でもそのどちらであっても必ず人間なんだ。
しかしどうやってせいぜい10センチ程度しか開かない扉の隙間からどうやったら室内の2人を。
それにしても耐え難い匂いです。
Let's hear it out, Samus. I have a theory as well. I'm sure it's not how it was done. I don't know what that is. My theory was that the thing the chain goes into on the wall, could you somehow fit a screwdriver through that, unscrew it, open the door, and when you leave, screw it back in? No, unfortunately I'm not a Whovian. Wow, Captions knows the word Whovian. Way to go. Oh, it didn't that time.
一体何事なのですか？
A really strong magnet that can go through the door, unlock the chain, and then, or the chain is already open, and then you use it to lock it as you leave. Canon and Kumasawa, who'd gone ahead, realized before they even reached the kitchen that the smell wasn't coming from there. That was because on their way to the kitchen they noticed an even thicker wave of stench was rising up from the stairs leading to the basement.
ボイラー室。またボイラーの調子が悪いんでしょう。
Those stairs led to the underground boiler room. The mansion's boiler was old and had been playing up recently. Both of them had witnessed problems with the boiler on several occasions, but they had never smelled it belching out a stench like this before. I mean, only grandfather's missing, right? Yeah. So at this point, if you're assuming that all... how many dead? 5, 6, 7... If all 8 people were killed by the same person or persons, our pool is like cut in half. If you think that the OG6 and next 2 were 2 different killers, then Eva could have been the killer of the original 6, and then they got killed by someone else.
今の音は
The sound they had heard from the basement had definitely been the sound of a door closing. Although she did phrase as a question, Kumasawa too had already realized that the sound couldn't have been anything else. Kumasawa was so surprised at the sound that her knees gave way yet again and she cowered. Because at that very moment, no one could have been in the boiler room. Just a few seconds ago, everyone had been crowded together in even Hideyoshi's room. But who caused the sound of the door closing just now?
Canon-san!
Instantly gathering the situation, the Canon ran down towards the basement. Since they'd heard the sound of the door closing just now, and there was no trace of someone climbing the stairs, that meant the person who closed the door was now inside the boiler room. You see, the thing is that a bunch of the people here want to believe that this is not the work of magic or a witch or something like that, that all of it's explainable. If the boiler room had been a dead end, Cannon wouldn't have rushed in so hastily. But Cannon was a servant, so he knew. There were two entrances, one that opened to the mansion and the one that opened to the courtyard. If he didn't chase them now, they might slip away. Kumasawa reached the same conclusion long after Cannon did, but she couldn't let him go alone. If the thing in the boiler room was the killer, an opponent who'd easily killed 6 adults in the first murder, then Cannon would be no match if he simply confronted them alone. Of course, by this argument, Kumasawa joining him alone wouldn't mean anything but... At any rate, after a delay, Kumasawa decided that she mustn't let Cannon go alone, and she dashed down the stairs. At that time, Cannon was already in the boiler room. The boiler room's characteristic damp heat tormented him. It had always been an unpleasantly smelly and hot place. On top of that, the room was full of that horrible stench which made Cannon feel like he was going to be sick. There's no doubt that this room was the origin. In that case, Cannon should have been searching for where the smell was coming from. However, Cannon kept gazing straight forward as he grabbed a hatchet from the tool shelf just off to the side of the door. He hadn't stretched out his hand because he wanted a hatchet. He'd wanted to grab a weapon, any weapon. Why? Cannon gazed into the darkness where the naked light bulb couldn't pierce. Then he answered.
ルーレットは数字と赤黒にかけて配当を競い合う。だが赤か黒かのような。
The words coming from Cannon's mouth were swallowed up by the darkness. That sudden darkness suddenly started to swirl, glittering. It was a very fantastical scene. Golden, sparkling butterflies that hid in the shadows all over the boiler room flapped their wings, twinkling beautifully, and disappeared into the darkness, gathering together. Cannon continued speaking, directing his words at the darkness as it swallowed the butterflies up. But as the butterflies gathered in the darkness, they, perhaps, probably, no, they must have laughed. But Cannon continued to speak without faltering in the slightest.
逆により的中率の低いかけ方をすれば親方様は天文学的なリスクを的中できることを奇跡と呼びその結果得られる天文学的な配当を魔法と呼んでいた。親方様とお前がどんな魔法を求めてルーレットに挑んでいるのか。しかしお前ルーレットには It
has 2 green pockets. Roulette has a special pocket called Zero, which means the house takes everything in certain variants of the game, meaning that all of the coins bet on the table will be swept up, just as though everyone is forfeit.
僕は一つだけ心に決めていた。もしシャノンが殺されて僕が生き残るようなことがあったなら、この身を投げ出してお前のルーレットをすべて台無しにしてやろうと。
Yeah, it is weird, right?
これは親方様が決めたルールでも、ましてやお前が決めたルールでもない。このルールは僕が作った。僕は
もう家具じゃない。お前のルーレットのゼロなんだ。
Cannon's face twisted with humiliation. It was clear he had been dealt ridicule in response to his self-denial. Cannon's brow creased even further. A furious expression that he had never shown anyone appeared on his face. The hand grasping the hatchet was shaking. Sweat became drops which slid down. It was clear that the emotion causing Cannon's hand to shake was not anger alone. However, Cannon suppressed that emotion.
僕はもうお前の言葉に惑わされたりはしない。悪魔のルーレットはこれでおしまいだ。地獄にてさらに1000年。次の召喚者を待つがいい。ベアドリージュ！
When Cannon swung the hatchet upwards and tried to dive into the darkness definitely sneered. It sneered at the courage as vulgar, lazy, futile, and meaningless. And his hatchet still held aloft. Couldn't take another step after that. With a clang, the hatchet that Cannon had been grasping fell and rolled on the floor. And following that, with a pair of thuds, Cannon's knees hit left, then right. That hand, which looked like it was trying to catch the sky, now that the hatchet had been dropped, gradually lowered, and rested on his chest. Then the other hand did the same. Looks like we've got more murder. Right there was a handle with a demon-shaped design engraved upon it. The same type of weapon that had stabbed into Eva and Hideyoshi's foreheads was in Cannon's chest. Fresh blood dribbled from the corner of Cannon's mouth as it twisted in anguish. It was makeup too powerful for Cannon's white skin. Around the scene, the glittering gold butterflies danced mesmeringly through the darkness. It was a beautiful, beautiful dance, a funeral march of tribute, ridicule, and contempt for a single boy's self-sacrifice. Cannon had already been prepared for his own death, but he attempted one last measure of resistance, to reject death, and at least the form had been delivered to him. With both hands he grasped the handle of the weapon sticking into his chest, and gritting his teeth with the acute unearthly pain, he pulled it out. For only a moment, a bright red spray gushed out. It made an unpleasant blop sound. It probably resembled the sound of Cannon's soul as it was sucked into the swamp of the dead.
Cannon-san?
Misawa screamed at the incomprehensible sight in front of her. Cannon was lying in a pool of blood. Misawa's heart was a complete mess. What a terrible fate. He would have been killed if I had been with him. What incredible fortune. If I had been with him, I might have been killed too. As she screamed, her expression was filled with complete confusion. All the muscles of her face were pulled up, almost as though she was smiling while crying. No one could have made fun of an expression such as this. First one to dash in was Natsuki, with rifle at the ready. Battler and Genji dashed in after her. Normally, they probably would have started discussing the origin of the violent stench filling the boiler room. After they saw Cannon, who was lying on the ground as if he was drowning in an ocean of his own blood, the stench wasn't important anymore. I mean, let's take a look, shall we? Not dead yet, not confirmed. There you go. Natsui realizing even though Kanon was on the verge of death, he was still conscious, so she sent Genji to get the doctor. Natsui, holding the rifle aloft, faced the darkness in the center of the boiler room and shouted,
そこに隠れているものは何者です。おとなしく出てきなさい。そちらから出てこないなら容赦なく撃ちます。
ライトだ。おばさん、照らすぜ。
Battler, thinking quickly, took a large flashlight from the tool shelf, alongside the door, and used its light to cut through the darkness Natsui was glaring into. But the light only shone on mechanical-looking piping and a door. The door had been left open a small crack, and it was obvious that someone had left through there in a hurry.
夏代おばさん、あの扉はどこへ？
源氏、あの扉はどこに通じているのですか？
中庭です。
逃がすかよ、くそこの野郎
！Give Battler a minute. He might die in a sec. Battler let out a war cry as he slammed into the door. Cool air from outside suddenly rushed in. There were some thin, rough stairs leading up. Battler ran up them, shouting. Natsui also rushed up the stairs, chasing after Battler. At the top was the courtyard. The courtyard of the mansion had been built strictly for lighting purposes, so it wasn't a very elegant place. Because it was surrounded on all sides, the air was calm and completely undisturbed, even though they could hear the sound of strong winds. There was only the gentle, sorrowful rain. With the cold, scattered raindrops, Battler dashed up the stairs and into the courtyard, where he looked in every direction. Of course, the odds of him finding a suspicious silhouette just standing around nonchalantly were pretty much zero. We have probably lost Kanon from the boiler room as well. He turned again and again, and kept spinning until he almost lost his sense of direction. He prayed that he could see the culprit somewhere in this scenery. There was no chance. All he saw as he spun was more and more of the mansion's heartless walls and windows. Furthermore, there were two entrances to the mansion from the courtyard, and neither of them were locked. Because the courtyard couldn't be entered from outside the mansion, doors had been built without locks. But he couldn't tell which one they had left through. He had to give up. Battler pounded the wall with his fist, swearing. We did not determine what the smell was. Battler put his head against the wall and scratched at it with his fingernails as he cried. I mean, my first thought would be to try to draw someone in to take a look at it, which is exactly what happened. Battler was a boy who could understand the feelings of pain and regret in a person's heart. So he cried with all of his strength. Natsuhi, who'd always thought of Battler as a strong person, was a little surprised to find that he had this delicate side. I mean, if we take things at face value, it's related to the message from Beatrice that we got at the dinner before. That kicked everything off. And I believe this is still related to the poem where it keeps saying every day a certain number of people are going to die. At the same time, understood how easily hurt the heart of a young person could be, so she held him.
大丈夫です。あなたも、ジョージ君も、マリアちゃんも、ジェシカも、私は絶対に守ります。
Well, the end of the poem, I believe, is everyone dies and then is brought back to life.
母として、そして後宮家の代表として。
Battler, after sobbing to Natsui's chest for a while, wiped his tears with a bitter smile, and tried to convey that he'd cried more than enough already, just as he'd done the times before.
とにかく一度下に戻りましょう。犯人を探すより自分たちの身を守る方が最優先です。明日になれば船が来る。そうすれば警察がやってきて全てを白日のもと
Probably
に
not
晒
high,
し出
because
し
I
てくれ
believe
るで
it's
しょう。
supposed to be they come back at the end, not in the middle. We are still missing...
犯人がどうあがこうとも
I mean, I guess there's
こ
a
の
few
島から逃
options.
げられるも
One,
のですか。
we can't be sure that someone didn't go to the original 6 who are dead and take one of their bodies to burn. Or it could be our grandfather, who we still have no idea where he is. And the seagulls cry if the crime will be solved. But for some reason, Battler felt a slight sense of uneasiness, as if the seagulls would never cry again. That couldn't be true. The typhoon passes, the lively seagull should return to the harbor again. I returned to the boiler room alongside Aunt Natsuki and told the room weakly that we hadn't found anything. They told me that Dr. Nanjo and Georgia Aniki had carried Kanonkan to the servant room. The servant room had a first aid kit and a sink that could apparently function as the nurse's office. Misawa-san and Jessica had accompanied them. Stains from Kanonkan's blood remained on the floor. Judging by the large amount of blood lost and the ruthless shape of the weapon that had fallen unceremoniously to the ground, I figured that Dr. Nanjo's treatment would probably end in vain. That weapon was doubtlessly the same type that had been stuck in Auntie Eve and Uncle Hideyoshi's foreheads. But wait, isn't the demonic design on the handle a little different? There seemed to be some small differences in that part. Still, as far as their overall shape was concerned, the weapons were all the same type. Though it had seemed brutal, we'd left the weapons stuck into Auntie Eve and Uncle Hideyoshi to preserve the crime scene. This was the first time I was able to have a perfect view of the entire weapon. Indeed, the weapon was not bladed like a knife, but shaped like an ice pick, or rather a thin stake. Also, it had a spiral-shaped design, sort of like a drill. To use a disturbing analogy, it looked like something that might have been driven into the hearts of human sacrifices in some demonic ritual. Including the handle, it was about 25 centimeters long, or just under a foot for the Americans. Half of that was the stake-shaped part, which was stained with deep red blood. The length of the blood-stained part made it clear just how deeply it must have penetrated into Kanonkan's chest. But Aunt Natsuki and the rest were not even looking at the weapon, instead standing in front of the incinerator where the horrible stench was emanating from. They had probably pulled that out of the furnace, where it must have been burning. It was still smoldering and kept sending out dense waves of that awfully unpleasant smell. We found the cause of the smell. Let's see what it is. Genji-san and Marie were staring down at it. Aunt Natsuki probably couldn't stand to look directly at it. She kept shaking her head and back to it. I thought after everything that's happened, nothing could surprise me anymore, but this, ugh. I stood there for a moment, moaning, with a rising urge to vomit. The true nature of that unearthly stench was the charred smell from within the incinerator of a burning corpse. The clothes, the surface of the body, and the hair were all hideously burned. The grotesque corpse was in a state where not the face, nor age, nor even the gender could be guessed at. When I thought about it calmly, I realized the corpse appearing at this time could only be one person: grandfather, who disappeared that morning, whose whereabouts had been unknown.
おそらく親方様だと思います。
私も同感です。このようなお姿でお亡くなりになるとはおいたわしや。
でもこの死体
本当にじい様だって保証はあるんすか？
Spiderkins, those are still flammable.
こうも黒焦げじゃ性別さえも想像つかないってのに。
バトラ君、足をご覧なさい。
I looked Sue with her handkerchief over her mouth and her eyes averted, pointed, and told me to look at the burnt corpse's feet.
両足の指です。よくご覧になってください。
本当だ。
Mrs. Ginjin said there were 6 toes on each foot. Each of the toes had been arranged so normally that I hadn't noticed.
親方様はお生まれの時から両足の指に特徴がございました。
Okay, our grandfather is in fact dead.
故に親方様は後ろ宮家の再興を託されたのです。
後宮家には昔から生まれつき多子症の方が多かったそうです。多分遺伝的なものでしょう。
Polydactyly literally means many fingers. Okay, so my dad had, I can't remember if it was like an uncle or a great uncle who had six fingers. He had like an extra thumb. There was a piece of flesh there that he couldn't really control. And yes, he had custom-made gloves to fit over it. So yes, that is a thing. Because of a little mistake by God, when the person is born, one of their toes or fingers splits into 2, and the total number increases. But a big deal isn't usually made of polydactyly in the world at large. That's because it isn't a disease, but something people are born with. And the hospital is already aware of it when they're still babies. About the time they turn 1, they're given surgery to make them normal. Even so, if a child has polydactyly, is treated before they become self-aware, so they might not even remember it themselves. Yes, his total is higher than expected. Incidentally, it seems they concur with the probability of 1 of every 2,000 babies, so even though it's not usually seen, it isn't that rare at all. Speaking of which, I think Uncle Hideyoshi mentioned something to me long ago. Something about how even Toyomi Hideyoshi, the man who unified Japan at the end of the Sengoku period, possessed 6 fingers on one hand. According to Aunt Natsuki, many of the Ushiromiya family heads, the ones praised for most of their wisdom, all possessed polydactyly. Geez, that's a tough word to say. He's still not listed as dead. He's still listed as missing. Because of that, when Grandfather was born, his relatives were all excited at the thought that he might become another wise leader. And when the leading relatives all died in the Great Kanto earthquake, it was apparently argued if anyone could restore the family from that, it would be Grandfather because of the auspicious sign of his birth. If Grandfather thought being the head was not a bad gig, the 6th toe must have been pretty lucky for him. Come to think of it, I've heard about some countries believe that people with polydactyly should be treated as gods and revered. This is besides the point. It is fairly common in mystery novels for a corpse to be burned to hide whose body it is. But it looks like in Grandfather's case, just being toasted wasn't enough to hide the proof of his identity. And Grandfather's body was not simply burnt. So you heard that water drop. That, I believe, is the sign that someone has died. That's the confirmation. But there you can see, almost his entire body, except for, like, that foot. Just like Auntie Eve and Uncle Hideyoshi and Canon-kun too, who had been stabbed in his chest, he had one of those demon's ice picks stuck into his forehead.
指に当主の指輪がありません。
昨夜の手紙の通りということですか。お父様。さぞやご無念でしょう。
Ah, yes, I guess that makes sense, because it's not necessarily death. We have seen characters update as well. Gosh dang it, Beardy. I was gonna try to be like, no, I play happy games, and I was thinking, in my free time, I'm playing an old-timey murder mystery game, which almost assuredly is going to end in my death. And Tales of Arise, which at a very high level is about overthrowing slavery. So I'm gonna go with no. Ought not to be let her head droop and close her eyes tightly. The room would also become a vital crime scene for us to hand over to the police. It wasn't clear when Grandfather's corpse started burning in the incinerator. Since according to Genji-san, the flames hadn't been that strong, the body must have started burning a long time ago. And that stench must have slowly crept out of the furnace and filled the room bit by bit, eventually pouring out and climbing up the staircase. Putting aside whether he was rare or well done, Grandfather had been brought out, killed, and burned, even though he had started out in the locked room created by his auto-lock. There's probably no doubting this. However, according to Genji-san, the boiler room is usually locked. The probability that someone outside a group was lurking around committing the crime was now overwhelmingly high. There was also a good chance that this person was walking around with something like a master key. After all, the doors and windows throughout the mansion had been checked. But despite that, the culprit was freely strutting around the mansion. Why aren't you happy with the randomizer, Samuses? After this latest crime, can we now be sure that a 19th person exists? They haven't shown themselves once, and yet they're trying to tout their existence. Samus says, after you left the other night, I soft-locked myself because I was trying an out-of-bounds glitch to see if I could get to an item that the tracker said I should be able to get to, but I'm pretty sure is wrong. I did the out-of-bounds glitch, only to realize it wouldn't let me access the area I want to, and I'm soft-locked, and I had to restart the game. Well, restart the save. Luckily for me, I saved just before that. Along with Kiryu-san's chessboard theory, I've been using this contradiction to deny the existence of a 19th person. By flipping over the chessboard once more. The very fact that this crime makes it perfectly obvious that a 19th person exists means that the existence of the 19th person is even less possible. That's right. Because it's obvious that they exist, they must not exist. As long as that 19th person doesn't show themselves in front of us, the culprit can get Grandfather out through the door sealed by the receipt. They can kill Auntie Eve and Uncle Hideyoshi from the other side of the door sealed by a chain. And it's possible for them to create a fictional 19th person through strange tricks and devices. If we still want to believe that the culprit is among us, then the list of suspects is very short. 4 of us kids, Aunt Natsuhi, Genji-san, Kumasawa Bachan, and Dr. Nanjo. One of these people has to be the culprit. Wait, we can't be sure of that. Just a second ago, we started doubting whether the body here was actually Grandfather's, right? Maybe we should try thinking of the other bodies in the same way. For example, the first 6 all had their faces horribly destroyed. Some of the bodies had kept enough of their face for us to confirm who they were. But my old bastard, for example, he had lost his entire face as though it had been peeled off. We'd only figured out which body was which by their clothes and surroundings. The culprit prepared a fake corpse beforehand and disguised it to make it look like they died, and then hit someone and continued their killing spree. It sounds ridiculous, but that doesn't mean it's an impossible trick. It's too early to give in to this 19th person. No, this witch.
マリアちゃん、それ以上しげしげと見てはなりません。
The 19th person theory is supported by the fact of, like, who else could have done this? If we were all together, either in the kitchen or in the parlor, how did one of us slip out and find enough time to set up this locker room to kill Auntie Eva and Uncle Hideyoshi? those are the kind of things. It's circumstantial. There's definitely no definite proof of the 19th person. It's all just circumstantial.
さあ、バトラ君も。カノンの容体も気になりますし、いつまでもこのようなところにはいられません。戻りましょう。
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely, I think, arguments for both sides. I thought showing people your attorney badge was all that mattered. Maria hadn't gone out with everyone else, but remained in the boiler room. The thing she was staring at fixedly at was probably not grandfather's body, but the demon's ice pick that was sticking out of his forehead. No doubtably an irresistible item for the obsessed. I rapped her on the head.
Maria, ベアトリーチェの目的は何なんだ？俺たち全員の命か。
ベアトリーチェはもうすぐ蘇るんだよ。その時、誰も生き残れはしない。
よくも笑えるもんだぜ。自分だけ蚊帳の外だと思ってるのか？どうして自分の身に危機が迫っていると感じ、どうして怯えない？
ベアトリーチェは約束してくれたもん。私は黄金鏡へ連れて行ってもらえるんだよ。そこはね、しがらみも何もない全ての人たちがずっと一緒にいつまでも優しくし合っていける。私は楽しみだよ。
I mean, after the events that have transpired here today, I think everyone here should probably have some therapy. We're down to the kids now outnumber the adults.
その時はもうすぐだもん。
Is that any better, Beardy? I made her face disappear. So what kind of person is Maria? I only knew what Maria was like 6 years ago when she was 3. She'd been pure and obedient, a good kid. This new Maria 6 years later, and the Maria I knew, didn't seem to fit together. Just who is she, this witch who calls herself Maria? To her, with her obstinate beliefs in witches, this series of unsolvable crimes is proof that witches actually exist. Every time something occurs that would be difficult for a human, it becomes a little harder for the rest of us to not believe in that witch called Beatrice. It must be an intense pleasure for Maria to see her relatives, who once firmly denied the witch's existence, start acknowledging her existence one by one. Is that why she's in high spirits?
マリア、もう一遍だけ聞く。どうせ答えは同じだろうが、もう一遍だけ聞く。お前は昨日、バラ庭園で手紙をもらった。そいつは誰なんだ？
おお、だからベアトリーチェ。バトラがまだ信じない。おお。
Maria only repeated what she'd already said. Maria had met with the 19th person, the witch. Had that really been a 19th person, or had it been one of the 18 who told her to say otherwise? All that's certain is that Maria has been with the rest of us constantly, has always had an alibi, and hasn't done anything that would put her under suspicion. She's simply overjoyed at being made Beatrice's messenger, and is certainly not our 19th person, I think. That's right. I wonder what's written in the letter we picked up in Auntie Eve and Uncle Hideyoshi's room. Aunt Natsuki should still have it with her. But her disappearing was before people started dying. I think she's a little older than that, but she acts age regressed. I think she's supposed to be around, like, 10? In the end, Canon-kun did not regain consciousness. I think I heard a drop. Thank you, Samson. I forgot that he just said that information. So she's 9. There we go. He was presumptuous for furniture. This feels like when you're playing that trivia murder party from Jackbox, and it's like how you died at the end. Was presumptuous for furniture. Sounds like a death note. Literally just this second, I heard the sound effect. Even though Dr. Nanjo and the rest did all they could to heal him, there was very little that could be done on an island like this without medicine or proper facilities. However, Canon-kun was the only human ever to confront the culprit. If only he could give us some kind of clue. But by the time he was carried here, it was already too late. Okay, Samus says, who's your next favorite character? Just so I can tell the 19th person. I mean, Beatrice. Genji? Alright. Beardy, I literally went over this. This was, I'd put it in Discord. But this was something that I hate, where games and media, etc., give you this, like, unreliable narrator, or worse, my least favorite, a narrator who, omits information that you should know. So we're seeing this through the eyes of Battler, even though we see, like, different chunks with the servants to give us more context, which is probably just stuff that they would tell us later. But yeah, if we're the murderer and he's withholding this information from us, then yes, I would hate that. Yeah, if you're curious what game I'd put this in the Discord. There's one game that does this, like, right off the bat, and I hated it so much. I almost stopped playing it. But I'm glad I didn't. It ended up being a better game. I'm glad you know just from the context. I will say, I liked 3 over 2, which might be a contentious opinion. Dr. Nanjo's shirt had been sprayed by a violent spurt of blood, so it was easy to imagine the devotion with which he had tried to save Canon-kun's life up until the very last second. Jessica was crowded in the corridor, crying in anguish. I agree with you on the ending, but everything leading up to that, besides the first bit and the ending, I like the middle a whole lot better of the third. The second one, besides having mechanics about, like, getting around that I found were not ideal, it was the only one where I guessed the entire plot of one of the cases before it even happened. I was talking with my brother, and I won't say the specifics, but I was like, hey, at some point, if someone does this, if this person does this, and that's the reason why they're the killer in a case, I'll be very mad. And it happened exactly like I said it would. She'd probably been taking care of Canon until the moment of his death. George Anarchy tried to approach her with words of comfort, but when Jessica pushed him away, he stopped trying to interfere and left her alone. She also only let Canon go ahead by, like, 5-10 seconds.
気に病むことはない。仮に一緒だったら熊沢も襲われていたかもしれん。それに愚かにも先走ったゆえの自業自得だ。
そんな言い方ってねえぜ。カノン君は犯人の姿を見つけて勇敢に立ち向かったんだ。熊沢さんも一緒だったら犯人は躊躇して逃げることを選んだかもしれない。
Emotion-filled words that I thought I'd never hear from the normally tactful Jessica tumbled out of her mouth. Kumasawa, looking truly sorry, could do nothing but hang her head.
ジェシカ、今は言葉をかけるべきじゃない。僕だって。そしてバトラ君もだろう。もう何が何だかわからなくて心が張り裂けそうだよ。
There were tears in George Aniki's eyes again. Seeing Jessica break down crying probably brought back the pain of losing his parents. I had already cried myself dry, so I didn't want to cry anymore. However, I felt my pain in their hearts.
大丈夫だよ、ジェシカお姉ちゃん。カノンにだってまたすぐ会えるよ。
When you're dead, Jessica.
よしてくれよ。そういう慰めはいらねえぜ。
You're going to die, Jessica.
ベアトリーチェは死者も失った愛すらも蘇らせる。だからきっとすぐに会えるよ。そしてきっとみんなで穏やかに過ごせるから。
カノン君を殺したのがマリアに昨日手紙を渡したっていうベアトリーチェなのか。
Now 8 p.m. on Sunday.
そいつはどこにいるんだよ。どこに隠れてるんだよ。私が見つけて引き裂いてやる。言えよ。知ってるんだろ犯人の正体を。お前は何を知っていて何を隠してるんだ。話しやがれ。
お嬢様、おやめください。
ベアトリーチェはいる。
畜生、源氏さん話せよ。マリアが犯人を知ってる。しかもそいつは知ってて隠してるんだ。そして私たちの内情を伝えて殺しの手引きをしてるに違いないんだぜ。
ジェシカ、静かにしなさい。
Jessica rushed at Maria and grabbed hold of her. Genji tried to stop her, but Jessica could not be calmed. Next thing I heard was the sound of Anatsuki slapping Jessica's face. I didn't hear that sound. After that, only Jessica's sorrowful, sobbing voice resounded through the
マリア
hall.
ちゃん、僕は君が断じて犯人ではないことを知っている。君はいつも僕たちと一緒にいたし、犯人なんかと通じている時間はなかった。だから聞かせてほしい。君に昨日手紙を渡したベアトリーチェとは誰なんだい。
Although those words seemed kind, they clearly showed that George still had some doubts about Maria. He hadn't tackled Maria, however, he felt exactly the same way Jessica did.
兄貴、同じことは俺もさっき聞いたぜ。返事は同じさ。
マリアちゃんの口から聞きたい。ベアトリーチェとは誰なんだい。
言ってもどうせ信じない。
それはどういう意味だい。ひょっとして僕らのよく知る人物が犯人で、君は何かの事情からそれをかばうために黙っているというのか。君はあの手紙を誰にもらったんだい。
ベアトリーチェにもらったんだよ。何度だって言う。手紙はベアトリーチェにもらった。ジョージお兄ちゃんがベアトリーチェを信じないのは殴れる相手じゃないから。ジョージお兄ちゃんはやるせない気持ちを暴力に変えて誰かにぶつけたいと思っている。だから殴れる相手が人間じゃなきゃ収まりがつかない。だからそんなジョージお兄ちゃんには真実を話しても受け入れられない。だから言っても無駄。信じない。でもマリアは何度も言うよ。 真実だから言うよ。ベアトリーチェはね。黄金鏡の扉はもうすぐ開かれるよ。マリアはそこに行くの。ベアトリーチェが約束してくれたの。その世界ではママも優しくてパパも一緒で優しいの。マリアは早くそこへ行きたいの。みんなはベアトリーチェのことを恐れている。そしてそれは無理もないことだけど。なら安心して。ベアトリーチェは言ってたよ。台風が去るまでに全てを終わらせるからって。
饒舌なマリアも嫌いじゃねえが、とりあえずはそのくらいにしとけ。魔女はいるいる言ってたお前にとってさぞや現状は愉快だろうが、とりあえずそ
If
いつはお
someone
前
steals
だけで
something,
噛み締めた。
I'm just gonna leave the door open, and if someone in the next hour comes and returns it, all will be forgiven, but it'll be... If someone wants to come and stab the child in the head, you know, all will be forgiven.
他人にまで押し付けるんじゃねえ。
こいつ前から気持ち悪いやつだとは思ってたけど、おかしいぜ。どっかおかしいぜ。バトラは思わねえのかよ。ケンジさんは
Thanks for the quote.
熊沢さんは母さんはどうだよ。マリアは犯人の正体を知ってて隠してる。確かに直接手を下してるわけじゃないかもしれない。でも間違いなく犯人の一味だぜ。そうさ、スパイさ。私たちと一緒になんかいさせられないぜ。
マリアちゃん、不謹慎な話を慎むべき時もあることを知りなさい。これ以上混乱に油を注ぐような真似が過ぎれば。
Natsui glared at Marie with frightening eyes. And a gun. Marie was used to Auntie Rose's loud style of scolding, but she was apparently undeveloped a resistance to this kind of silent telling off. She shrugged and kept her mouth shut. A desolate feeling filled the room. It felt as though things would get more complicated if someone spoke. How many people had died already? 6 in Dad's group. Also both Auntie Eva and Uncle Hideyoshi, Kanon-kun grandfather. There was a whole 18 people on this island. 10 of those had been killed. More than half of us had been killed. At this stage, there's absolutely no guarantee that the remaining 8 were going to be alright. Instead of like Twitch plays, it's like Twitch murders.
今は仲違いをしている時ではあります。犯人が神出鬼没に屋敷内を出入りしていることが間違いなくなった今。
Alright, chat, let's all vote for the next person to be murdered. Top choice is going to win.
私たちは明日まで身を守ることだけに専念しなくてはなりません。
Alright, it looks like Maria's our next choice.
夏日おばさんに極めて同感だぜ。犯人探しは今夜ゆっくりできるさ。今はどこで籠城するかを考えた方がいい。
As I said this, I pointed at the clock to everyone. Already 8 at night. We've been receiving shocks over and over again since the early morning. Both our bodies and minds were completely tired out. There was still a long time until tomorrow. We needed to find a place to barricade ourselves in. Somewhere where we could rest our bodies and feel even the slightest bit safe.
私も同感ですが。
But how does that make sense? If we already have... They can take out 6 people at once, 6 adults at once. They can get grandfather out of his locked room, and they can kill people inside of a locked room.
私も含め、もうみんな 体も心も限界まで打ちのめされています。今からそれを考えた方が賢明でしょうな。
そういうこった。敵はマスターキーに準ずるものを持っている公算が高い。
シャノンやカノン君、ゴーダさんはマスターキーを持ってましたか？
For the original 6, we confirmed that they were all within about a 1 hour time frame, I believe, from about 1 to 2 in the morning.
はい。勤務時間中だったなら身につけていたはずです。
現場をいじらない方がいいってんで、そこまでは調べなかったのが、誰かの鍵が奪われている可能性は否定できねえな。
Okay, so we can assume at this point that they can get into everywhere. Okay, everyone just empty your pockets. Who's got the master
そも
keys?
そも犯人はバラ庭園倉庫のシャッターを開けるために一度使用人室を訪れている可能性があります。そこでマスターキーをすでに入手していると考えて間違いないでしょう。
There were many servants serving the Ushiromiya family. Because of that, there were several master keys. Furthermore, every time the shifts changed, the keys were passed between the servants. She had to admit that the arrangement had been somewhat sloppy.
仮に殺された使用人の誰かのポケットから鍵束を拝借したとして、その鍵でも開けられない安全な場所はあるのか？
私たちはお仕事の都合上、すべてのお部屋の鍵を預かっております。お屋敷もゲストハウスもすべて。
つまり私たちはどこへ立てこもって鍵をかけようと上等だぜ。鍵なんかいるもんか。来るなら来やがれってんだ。返り討ちにしてやるぜ。
敵は正面から来ないよ。最初の6人はともかく母さんたちやカノン君、そしておじい様の霊を見る限り敵は孤立した人間だけを狙ってる。一部屋に固まっている僕たちのところへ堂々と乗り込んで来られるほどの力はないんだよ。
そうだな。兄貴の言う通りだ。ひょっとするとおばさんのライフル銃が。
なら良いのですが。
マリア、言いたいことがあるんだろうが、
Where you probably want to say that witches weren't afraid of things like guns or something like that. If she were to say it out loud, the atmosphere around here would start to get pretty edgy. I'd notice and decide to put a stop to it.
よろしいでしょうか。一箇所だけ使用人の鍵束でも入れない場所が。
それはどこです？
はい、親方様の書斎です。
Yeah, the master's room has just the one key.
私は反対だぜ。じい様の気持ち悪い部屋になんか入りたくない。
あの部屋に入れる鍵は何本？
2本です。
Oh, and I guess the master had
1
one.
本は常に私、もう1本は親方様がお持ちでしたが。
Genji took a handkerchief out of his pocket and opened it, showing us the filthy and burnt key to the study. Then showed it alongside his own key, which he had once left on
本
Natsuki.
来なら警察のために鍵も残すべきだったのです。親方様より書斎の留守は必ず守るようにと仰せつけられておりましたので。なるほど。ということは金蔵さんの書斎は唯一の安全地帯というわけですな。
そういうことになります。あの怪しげな匂いの部屋に一晩も立てこもるなど、あの部屋が一番安全であることを今は認めなければならないようです。
その絶対安全とは言い切れねえけどな。
バトラ君の説のおじい様がうまくレシートをやり過ごして自分の意思で部屋を出たと考えるなら籠城の価値はあるかもしれない。
楽観的すぎだぜ、兄。
However, at the same time, I thought he brought up a pretty interesting point. Well, this gives us a chance to question the enemy, the witch herself, about how the sealed door had been opened. We assume that the culprit used some technique to abduct grandfather from the study. They'd have to show us the same trick again if they wanted to assault us in the study. It's an opportunity to force the culprit to demonstrate that trick right before our eyes. If they're a real witch, we would be forcing them to say open sesame and open the door by magic right in front of us. But such thing is probably impossible. You flip over the chessboard, you realize the culprit's obviously just trying to act like they're a witch. If they really were a witch, all they'd have to do is appear in front of us and show off a spell colorful enough to silence all our doubts. Since they were avoiding doing that, everything must be the work of a fake witch who wants us to think otherwise. Therefore, a culprit who used a technique other than magic to defeat the locked room couldn't open the door before our eyes.
じいさんの部屋ってのは8人で押しかけても大丈夫なく。
はい。ベッドにソファー、毛布類もありますので、贅沢を言わなければ流しにご不浄。冷蔵庫に酒。
ひゅー、そいつはすげえぜ。しかし自分の家の中にさらに自分の家を作った島を丸ごと買って自分の夢を全て実現しきったじい様の最後の家にしちゃ随分手狭な。
そうですね。
You gotta have good drinks when you're doing some witch hunting.
いつの頃からか、お父様にとっては屋敷内ですら心を。
そこに引きこもっていたのを私たちは嘲笑い、そして今度は私たちがそこに立てこもろうってわけだ。
ジェシカちゃんは立てこもるより犯人を探しに行きたいという感じだね。
もちろんこっちから探しに行って見つけられるなんて思っちゃいない。結局は待つしかない。ならどこで待ったって同じだろ。逃げも隠れもしない。客までテレビでも見ながらのんびり現れるのを待とうじゃねえかよ。
現れなければ現れないで十分です。犯人を暴くのは私たちである必要がないから。
正論ですな。警察が来るまで危険を冒すべきではありません。
ありがとう。私はお父様の書斎に移るべきだと思います。確かにお父様が連れ出された可能性があり、絶対の安全が保証されているわけではない。しかしバトラ君の推理のお父様が何らかの方法で自ら書斎。
The crazy theory had just been what I came up with to stop the argument. However, just as Aunt Eva had said, even though that trick would work, I can't begin to explain what motive would have made Grandfather do something so awkward to sneak out of his own study. Plus, that trick of hiding under the bed and waiting for the receipt to be removed before escaping couldn't have been used unless Grandfather had known that this receipt was wedged in the door. Aunt Eva hadn't pointed out that last part. It's clear how absurd the theory was. Then does this mean that, as Aunt Eva claimed, the door was sealed and it was a locked room? Is it a doubtless fact that Aunt Natsuhi was the culprit and that the room was a locked room? If Auntie were here now, she would probably make the claim openly, do me the favor of blowing my strange theory away. But anyway, I had to admit that a room with both a bed and a toilet that all 8 people could be shut up in, with only 2 keys, both of which were gathered here, had to be the safest place in the mansion right now. At the very least, I figured this would be better than shutting ourselves up in the parlor again and saying nothing went wrong while we were in there before. No, wait. Were we safe only because we were shut up in the parlor? What if leaving that room and moving to an unexplored location is actually more dangerous? No good, no good, no damn good at all. My flimsy head is about to break out in a fever. I kept flipping over the chessboard. The real and the inverse kept switching with each other over and over, and I lose my ability to believe anything. It seems like the culprit's one of the 18. I want to believe in Beatrice. Once I start believing in Beatrice, I start wanting to find the culprit amid the 18. It keeps spinning around forever, and in the end my thoughts haven't taken one step from where they started. How far back in the past was it that Kyrie-san taught me this chessboard way of thinking? The concept of examining the situation by flipping it over and thinking from the enemy's side. I get the feeling that I was so interested in this way of thinking at the time that I let it guide my way. I thought about everything. By the way, Kyrie-san was Dad's co-worker back then. I had dreamed that the day would come when she would be added to our family. Didn't Kyrie-san tell me something? It's a feeling she once said that, while the chessboard thinking was one way to look at things, it wasn't all-powerful by any means. And in fact, it was actually bad to rely on too much.
チェス盤思考ってのはね、昔本で読んだゲーム理論というものを
私なりに解釈したものよ。とても面白い学問だから、バトラ君も大学に入ったら挑戦してみるといいわよ。
ぜひやってみたいっす。それを勉強してチェス盤思考をもっと鍛えたら、どんな相手の手の内
Yes,
も
it's a
読めるみたいで
game
楽しい
theory,
じゃない
a
ですか。
murder game theory.
でもね、盲信しちゃダメよ。ゲーム理論は非常に奥深く、
Apparently in the
複雑な学
past they
問
don't have synced voices, like mouth movements.
チェス盤思考はその上辺だけを私なりに解釈した考え方に過ぎない。バトラ君が想像するほどに相手の手の内を読み切るには相当の勉強が必要よ。しかもチェス盤理論は応用の利く便利
Yeah,
なもので
exactly.
は
We
あ
didn't
って
have
も
mouth movement in the
完璧
past.
ではない。便利ではあっても弱点が多い。ええ、チェス盤思考の基礎はゲーム理論。ゲーム理論は突き詰めると数学に行き着くの。数学の弱点は何か知ってる？ノイズよ。
In math, when you write 1 plus 1 equals 2, that equation will always be 1 plus 1 equals 2, no matter how many billions of years pass. Nothing more, nothing less. That's because there's absolutely no noise mixed in. But for example, unlike math, the Japanese language has noise mixed in. Kanji are a good example. Old kanji and new kanji are slightly different. It represents an introduction of noise created by change over the ages. Isn't history the same? There's dozens of policies that seem foolish in the modern era, but were meaningful at some point in the past. As the rules of chess are fixed, when a pair of experts are discussing one particular position, it's possible they could reach the same conclusion whether they're from 100 years in the past or 100 years in the future. However, if the rules of chess had gone through massive changes over time, which it has, although not, I think, in the last 300 years or so, it's possible that the discussion about that same position would have changed as well.
その通り、人の世の事象は本来ノイズだらけなのよ。人の感情だってそうでしょ？全く同じことが起こったからといって、人は必ず決められた反応を示すとは限らない。それを数学の理論で当てはめ、相手の行動を読もうとする時点で、すでに理論には弱点と限界があることを知らなければならない。手っ取り早く言うと、チェス盤思考はノイズや気まぐれ、そして誤解、認識ミスに非常に弱いの。
That's right. Kiri-san definitely said that. In the first place, chess is a game where both sides play by the same rules and fight with the same objective, namely victory. This is why it's possible for both sides to predict the other's moves. It's possible to read an opponent because you can always suppose that they will advance the best moves they can find. Yeah, actually, there's 17.9999999 people. What if the opponent is fickle, or a little tired and makes a move that can hardly be called the best? Or maybe, what if the game actually has special rules, only the enemy knows them, and they can make use of something unknown to you? In fact, what if the opponent actually has some goal other than victory? Think from your enemy's perspective. That is the basis of chessboard thinking. Which means that if you misunderstand your enemy, any and all answers that you draw from that process will be complete rubbish and of no use at all. Many times I thought that by using chessboard thinking I'd gotten a glimpse from the person behind these crimes. However, I don't know anything about the culprit. Am I just playing in a labyrinth of thought? Kiri-san were here at a time like this. She'd probably be able to notice something with a much, much sharper thinking ability. Jessica never warmed to the idea of moving into grandfather's study, and Aunt Matsui persisted when we decided to move there. Everyone was already trapped by paranoia. Kumasawa-san had prepared dinner once already. But after the incident involving Georgia and Yuki's parents, the kitchen and the parlor had become temporarily devoid of people. Someone said that it might have been poisoned at that time. Is that we were unable to touch even the food that Kumasawa-san had taken the trouble to make for us. The manner in which the first 6 had been killed was still unknown, but there was a possibility that it was poison. By this method, even a single person would be able to carry out the murder of 6 fully grown adults. Furthermore, this idea made it seem like there was only a single culprit, who was also afraid of Aunt Natsuki's rifle, and this was very good for our emotional stability. but the fatigue and hunger were even harsher than we had imagined. So, on Kumasawa-san's suggestion, we all went along together to the kitchen, gathered some canned food which would be hard to poison to take with us. All of Kumasawa-san's efforts to reward us with at least a nice dinner on this savage day regrettably came to nothing. Food piled up on the serving cart just looked a little sad. We all started climbing the stairs. Aunt Matsuhi led the group, warily staring into the darkness with both eyes and the barrel of the gun. We arrived at the third floor just as Aunt Matsuhi had warned us beforehand. It was a mixture of a chemical smell and a sweet, sickly aroma. A stench hanging in the air that felt like it was eating into our heads.
なるほど。こりゃ一晩もこもったら頭痛にでもなりそうな匂いだな。今更ながら、じい様の書斎に反対したジェシカに賛成だぜ。
This exceptionally magnificent door felt like it was the source of the stench. So this was the door to the forbidden study which had turned away all who visited it. Genji-san was unlocking the door. Marie was staring at the door and the doorknob with great interest.
すごいドア。
古くいかめしくて冗談の通じなさそうな、いかにもじい様の書斎にふさわしい。
霊的な悪意を退ける力がとても強く込められている。多分ベアトリーチェはこの扉を開けられないね。
お？それどういうことだ？
Maria pointed at the doorknob. A scorpion crest. A design like a magic circle arranged around a scorpion was inscribed there. This design, that's right. Isn't this just like those key holder charms that Maria gave Jessica and me yesterday?
火星の5の魔法陣は強力な魔除け。しかもこの魔法陣は相当丹念に作られていて、魔のものであるベアトリーチェにとってこの魔法陣はとても厄介だろうね。
それは心強いじゃねえか。この部屋ならベアトリーチェのマッシュから逃げ、うちの魔女様は実に頼もしいぜ。
ならベアトリーチェはどうやって中のおじい様を？
バトラが推理した通りだよ。ベアトリーチェは中に入れない。でも彼女には魔法があるし使い魔だっている。それらを使っておじい様が自分から書斎を出てくるように仕向けることはできるかも。
ああ、漫画で読んだな。吸血鬼は十字架が怖くて近づけねえけど、使い魔たちはへっちゃらなんで使い魔に襲わせるみたいなシーンを読んだことがあるぜ。
バトラたちに昨日あげたサソリのキーホルダーのようなお守りもこの火星の5の魔法陣だよ。込められている力は微々たるものだけど、この島を出るまでの間を守ってくれるだけなら十分だった。なくしちゃったそうだけどね。
サソリのキーホルダー。
昨日私が母さんに渡したお守りはドアノブにかけると魔除けになるとか言われて、私より母さんの方がいいかなってあの時は思って。
そうでしたか。ジェシカにしては
夏日おばさんがあれをドアノブに？
ええ、夕べそう聞き、寝る前に扉の内側のドアノブにかけました。
なら夏日おばさんはとても幸運だよ。そうだったなら夕べベアトリーチェは夏日おばさんに指一本触れられなかっただろうね。ベアトリーチェはさぞや悔しがったと思うよ。
Beatrice annoyed and lay one finger. And she thought back on that eerie graffiti she had seen that morning. Someone had been tearing at the outside of her door in blood-soaked hands and gasped in surprise. Could it be that this witch who calls herself Beatrice had tried to enter through the door to her own very room? The magic repelling charm had been hanging from the inside. She couldn't break through the door. So she was annoyed, as she scratched at it.
よせよ、そういう話。魔女なんかいないぜ。いるのは犯人。それも私たちと同じ人間だ。それを確かめる必要があるってなら、八つ先にして血が赤いかも確認してやろうじゃねえか。くそ。くそ。よくも、カノン君を。
Click. Genji unlocked the door. 8 entered Kinzo's study. Grandfather's study. I'd heard rumors about it beforehand, so it didn't surprise me all that much. He had done nothing more than fortify it thoroughly with his occult hobbies. Grandfather's hobbies had been chasing after pop idols. These walls might have been buried beneath idol posters. Even if I didn't understand it, I realized that this room was an amalgamation of all the things he enjoyed. Even so, I couldn't help but remain dumbfounded by the smell of this creepy medicine and the sweet stench that seemed to melt my head. When the door closed, it automatically made a clunk. I see. This is the auto lock that activated whenever the door is closed. And there were only 2 keys which could open this door from the outside, both of which were in the room. In other words, this room had become a locked room. Shutter, the receipt, the chain. Now, the auto lock. This 4th door had been locked in the most magnificent fashion, yet constructing a locked room in a perfect form that none could argue with. Just to make it absolutely sure that the room was secure, we checked all over for ways in or out. The windows were tightly locked. That should have been enough, but just in case we tried knocking over all the walls. After all, there had been whispers that there might be a hidden door in this room, but we couldn't find anything suspicious. Grandfather's study was very large. Even though he called it a study, it wasn't really a single room. It could be divided up into 4 basic sections. Study section, bedroom section, bathroom section, section for cooking that had a sink. I see the study does have enough in it to live in. I could understand how Grandfather could live his whole life in this room without ever leaving. It seemed that Grandfather wasn't in the habit of watching TVs. There was no television in this room, nor even a radio. Until tomorrow, unfortunately, there would be nothing for us to do but pass the time listening to the sounds of the rain. Dr. Nanjo gazed at the chessboard that sat on the table in front of the sofa and muttered. It's apparently the partly finished mats that he'd been playing with Grandfather until yesterday. The black had the white pretty well cornered, and it looked like checkmate would be reached in a few moves, the end of the endgame. Even though the checkmate had been almost reached, the endgame had still been rushed, and in the end was never completed.
やはりこの勝負は決着がつきませんでしたな。南條先生、わしは長く金蔵さんの友人だったが、金蔵さんにはいつも聡明な金蔵さんとわしは。
特にベアトリーチェ様のことになると人が変わったようでしたっけね。
In the direction of Kumasawa-san's upward gaze, a portrait of Beatrice could be seen. It wasn't massive like the one hanging in the entrance hall, but small, made for this room. Grandfather probably spent every day in this room and so much of his time talking to that witch in the portrait. Who was Beatrice to Grandfather in the first place? By now, you couldn't just explain her away by saying she was a story made by the parents to frighten children away from wandering into the forest. Well, I don't think I've fully read that one. Oh, I need to get through. While eating the canned food we had brought from the kitchen, we talked to her about who Beatrice was. Yeah, we gotta find the liquor cabinet. Whether the culprit was Beatrice herself or someone pretending to be her, whether they were witch or human, the lady in this portrait was strongly related to the basis and background of these crimes. We couldn't talk about them without talking about her.
そうだ。母さん、エヴァおばさんたちの部屋で犯人の手紙を拾ったんでしょ？
ええ。まだ開けていませんでしたね。開けてみましょう。
Anmatsuhi took out the Western-style envelope. Genji-san pulled a letter opener out of the drawer in the study desk and handed it to her. While watching her open it, George Aniki grimaced slightly. For all, it was a letter left at the site where his parents had been murdered. There was a good chance that its contents would say something unbearable to Aniki. It seemed that Aunt Natsuhi also realized that, so she glanced over the contents first without reading it aloud. We were a little frightened that she might grimace after reading something shocking, but she just frowned unhappily.
内容は
不愉快な一文があります。私たちを挑発するつもりなのでしょう。
Aunt Natsuhi, after deciding that the contents could be shown to the children, set it openly on the table. Everyone stared at it at the same time.
我が名をたたえ、なんだよ、うっせえぜ。
ベアトリーチェの勝ち名乗りみたいなものだろうね。くそ。
大方また怪しげな魔法陣でも出てくるのを期待してたんだろう。
魔法陣ではなかったけどね、想像は裏切られなかったよ。
どういう意味でしょう。自分の存在を誇示したいのでしょうか。
そう考えるのが妥当でしょう。この手紙で初めて私たちは昨夜の手紙の主が犯人であると理解できる。ここに書かれている内容よりも昨夜と同じ封筒でというところに意味があるものと思います。
封筒も風浪も間違いなく親方様が使われていたものです。
おお、もう私には何が何だか分かりません。こんなことは後ろ宮のお家にお仕えして以来初
This
め
is
て
the
のことで
first
す。
time in my life I've worked for a place where 10 people got murdered.
昨日の手紙の言う通りならベアトリーチェは自称じい様の最古の腹心だ。じい様も常々そう口にしてたんですよね。
I directed the question to Genji-san and Kumasawa-san, who nodded together.
ってことはじい様の次に詳しいのは源氏さんと熊沢さんってことになる。話してくれないっすか。
私は長いことわざと耳にしなかった。ですがこの後に及んではそうも言っていら源氏。
Genji-san didn't answer. He remained silent despite his knowledge, or did he know nothing at all? Still, I had a good guess. The ghost story of the witch Beatrice had long been deified among the servants. He'd probably been very close to grandfather too in his occult hobbies. There was a good chance he'd been indoctrinated with even weirder things, and come increasingly to deify the witch. As grandfather's most trusted servant, who had sworn loyalty to him, he might be the most influenced by the witch illusion that grandfather had created. So there was only one reason for Genji-san to remain silent. He could say it, but it would definitely cause a backlash, so it was better if he kept his mouth shut. It wasn't like we would believe him anyway. Something along those lines. Only a short while ago, Maria had been more than willing to speak bluntly and unrestrainedly, and that had earned her a scuffle with Jessica. It was natural for Genji-san to keep his silence. His mistress, that could be possible. For ordinary poor people, polygamy isn't only viewed negatively from a moral perspective. It's also an unimaginable financial situation. If that isn't the case for the very rich, it's possible for them to have another lover in addition to their real wife. We can't deny the possibility that grandfather had another woman in his life besides grandmother.
かもな。ばあ様は生きてた頃、よく疑ってたらしいぜ。浮気相手がいるってな。 私はてっきりそれはじい様の想像の中の魔女のことを
それなんとも面白い話になってきた。源氏さんは俺に言ったよな。ベアトリーチェはこの屋敷ができる以前からじい様に仕えてたって。
お屋敷が竣工したのは昭和27年と聞いています。
ってことはベアトリーチェという人は30年以上も昔からおじい様と連れ添っていたということになるね。
その30年前の愛人、もしくはその縁者や隠し子が何かの恨みがあって何らかの復讐を企んだか。なるほど。洋館ミステリーっぽいありがちなストーリーになってきたじゃねえか。
汚らわしい話ですが、一番納得できる筋書きです。どうですか、源氏。
おそらく親方様に亡くなられた奥様より愛しておられたに違いありません。
ベアトリーチェってのは、そして今はどうしてるんだ。
お屋敷ができるより前にお亡くなりになったと聞いています。
すでに死んで。
はい。親方様は大層深く悲しまれ、ベアトリーチェ様を蘇らせる方法として親方様はベアトリーチェ様をこのような狂気に駆り立てるほどに。
As Genji-san said this, he spread his arms as though asking us to look at this room filled with the signs of grandfather's madness. We were all at a loss for words. For this, his black magic copy was nothing other than creepy, and we found it impossible to understand what drove him to devote himself to it. Nobody had tried to understand Kinzo, dismissing him as an eccentric who had restored the Ushiromiya family amidst his madness. That's fine, Beardy. I can't remember exactly when you left, but basically we all are now in Grandfather's study, locked up, trying to wait out the night. All that had been on Grandfather's mind was the loss of the woman he loved, and the sorrow of being unable to give up on her. Just a few moments ago, this room had seemed creepy. From that instant, everything about it was starting to make sense. Creepy books, the magic circles, the medicine, all of it. All just because he wanted to revive once more the visage of a single woman who had left this world 30 long years ago.
一度だけ深く酔われた親方様にベアトリーチェ様のお話を聞かされたことがあります。詳しいことは忘れてしまいましたが、それはもう女の私が聞いて羨むように。
金蔵さんは後宮家の当主を継いだ時、当時まだ生き残っていた。
つまり後宮家にとって得になる女性との結婚を強制。
さようです。金蔵さんはお家復興のためだけに当主に据えられ、全ての重責を背負わされたのです。
Okay, so he had an arranged marriage.
そんな金蔵さんがどこでどういう経緯でベアトリーチェと知り合ったのかは分かりかねます。
それ以上語るのは。
That was when Grandfather truly fell in love for the first time. How deep that affection must have been. It was easy to tell just by looking around us. The room was covered with piles upon piles of things having to do with black magic. And Grandfather had spent day after long day shut in here, immersing in his research and isolated from the outside world, never taking a single day off. Couldn't help but realize how deep Grandfather's love for Beatrice was.
何をでしょうか。
私、使用人の人たちが 魔女を問診するのは違ったんだな。
Perhaps they had been acting as though at least Beatrice's soul had been restored, and existed inside this mansion in order to soothe grandfather's heart. With eyes closed, an expression as though he was remembering something from the distant past, Genji maintained his silence. He probably felt that to confess that would be to betray his one and only master in the most serious way, even though that person was already dead. Beatrice has revived as a witch, and she's in the mansion even now. That was his mantra, what he had believed and what he had made others believe. And Genji would take that with him to the grave. This might have been the last service he could offer his master. The legend of the witch, the mysterious tale of Rokenjima, that was still whispered of among the servants. Its true nature was a sad lie, no, an act of kindness towards grandfather, who had lost the person he loved above all else.
私はお父様の今ならそれがどれだけお父様
今の僕にならわかるよ。シャノンを蘇らせる方法が僕は今すぐにもこの部屋の次の兄貴。
Another strain of tears dripped from George's eyes. It was infectious. Tears rose to Jessica's eyes too, and she
ベアト
sniffled.
リーチェは言っていたよ。もうじき蘇ることができる。会うことができるって。
Very soon, the door to the Golden Land will be opened. And no, Beardy, we're listening to World End, which I guess is kind of the same thing as lifting the bodies at the floor. In that promised land, that glitters gold shall resurrect all the dead people's souls and revive the love they possessed as well. And I will sleep in a world of peacefulness forevermore.
そう言ったのか。マリアに手紙を渡した。
信じないよね。
ここにじい様がいたならきっと喜んだろうな。もうじきベアトリーチェが蘇ることにさぞや踊り上がって喜んだろうな。なら俺は信じたぜ。じい様が半生をかけて研究したことで蘇り、愛した女の魂が蘇ったと信じて寿命を全うできるって言うんなら。
バトラ。
一人の女性をずっと愛し続けた気持ちが周りにも伝わり真実となる。それを気遣いと呼べばそれまでだろうけれど、今の僕はあえてそれを。
気遣いじゃないよ。本当に魔法だよ。魔女だよ。やっぱり誰にもベアトリーチェの姿は見えないんだね。
Is Beatrice in the room with us? Some time passed. We listened to the sound of the rain. We considered what kind of love and madness must have possessed the owner of this room as he spent half of his life here.
女の私から言えばお父様の純愛の気持ちも少しは理解したいところですが。
Alright, and I think that is a good place for us to stop for today.